Welcome to It's Your Break. Hi, I'm Jonathan Mertz, and coming up on this episode of It's Your Break, this is the first in a series of episodes where I am actually featuring local people here in Kentucky and their businesses or their artwork or anything like that. It's part of my local series on this season of It's Your Break. And the first episode is from a friend of mine's company, Matt Adams of Hired Hand Studios. We're to be focusing on all different aspects of graphic design and more that his company offers. Here's a sneak peek of how the company came together.
I've never actually owned a studio. It's all just been, on the kitchen table or my desk that I finally got. I believe I came up with the concept of Hired Hand Studios, just kind of like a way to market myself. On the business card, it says graphic design, sketch artist, caricature artist. So it's kind of just a catch-all to, I guess you would call it a company or a business.
We're going to get much more deeper than just that. We're going to get so deep, we're going to find the weird stuff as well.
I did recently have someone ask me to draw a caricature for someone. They had lost their daughter the last year, and so they asked if I could draw a caricature from a photograph, and I said yes, of course. I mean, this was for a deceased person, and I didn't want it to look, it's a caricature, it's going to look goofy, but I didn't want it to look just like an absurd mess and a bunch of disassociative things, even though it was important to the person.
Yeah, I told you, things can get a little weird, but also things are going to be extremely fascinating. And it's all coming up next here on It's Your Break. Welcome back to It's Your Break. Hi, I'm Jonathan Mertz, and Matt Adams of Hired Hand Studios is with me. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. And it is fascinating because for people that don't know, me and Matt actually go way back. And it's funny because we really didn't know each other until kind of recently. Although we grew up playing in the same sports programs against each other in Henry County, Kentucky. I mean, I saw pictures of you on Little League teams that I know I played against. You played in high school baseball too, correct?
No, actually, I kind of retired from the student athlete thing, and middle school was the last time I think I played baseball.
And
then I became the football team's cameraman in high school. So,
that's pretty cool. Yeah. When did you start that?
I started. Technically, it would have been sophomore year of high school. I did a skit that I recorded for my health class, and Mark Johnson, the head football coach at Henry County back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He was also the health coach, or not health coach. What's a health coach? The health teacher. And he actually liked the way I filmed my sketch for his class, and he recommended me to Steve Gallion, who was the media teacher at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I got put in media class, and that actually became a big influence on my life. But I got put in media class just to become the team's cameraman. So it was actually, I even got a letterman's jacket for recording football games.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So at the same time that you're doing that, I am actually doing all the broadcast stuff for all the football games through the radio station at Eminence when we used to broadcast all the Henry County football games. And me and Bill Callis would go on site, as well as Penniston, and they would do, the commentary, and I would do all the engineering, and then even some of the sideline interviews back in the day. And I went to Eminence, so it was even more ironic because I was at the prime school that is y'all's rivalry in the same county. But I did it because that was my job through the radio station, and I had a blast doing that. But it's like I said, we had so many intertwining moments that we really didn't even know each other until we got involved with Theater Downstream, and I did It's a Wonderful Life with you all, and produced that, directed it, or co-directed it. That one actually. Me and Ashley co-directed that one, and then edited everything. Did a lot of the stuff there, and then again later on with Dracula. So this kind of crossing paths, it's just weird how it happens sometimes. You're like, you were there at that time? Yeah, I was here. I was there. Did you ever think about that with some people?
I haven't really dwelt on it, but it's kind of funny when you go back and think. Every so often I'll have someone, especially I did a lot of media stuff in high school, as we kind of touched upon, and so we did a variety show. And some of the people that came up behind me would talk like they knew me in high school, and I didn't really know them all that well because they were a couple of years behind us. And I graduated in 2000, so like people that graduated in 2003 or 2004 would say, "Oh, that was funny when you did that one thing," and I was like, "Oh, thanks," and then kind of just had to play it off because I didn't really know who they were, because outside of my small social group, I didn't socialize a whole lot, and then so I don't know where I was going with that thought, but it is interesting that they say it's a small world. But in Henry County is definitely a small community, but it's kind of interesting how, as small as Henry County is, there's still all these people that you haven't met or they didn't cross paths with and you didn't realize. I was actually at a funeral last week, and this guy that I went to high school with, I didn't think of it, but his last name's Brewer, and I had an uncle who's actually my dad's half brother. His name was Grover Brewer, and at this funeral, I haven't seen this guy from high school for like almost 20 years, maybe even more than 20 years. And he mentioned, it turns out we're related. I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, my great grandfather was Grover Brewer." And I said, "You're kidding." And he's like, "No, he was. I didn't know him too well until the last few years of his life, but I got to know him." And I said, "Well, that's crazy, because he was always my Uncle Junior." And they find out that he has this relative that was really important in his life, but he didn't know him until a few years ago, because we lost Uncle Junior. But, it's just funny how, like you said, we have all these connections and we don't realize it until you actually sit down and have a conversation with somebody.
So yeah, it's really, really fascinating, all the connections we actually make, throughout our lives. And to me, it's just so fascinating when you actually put it together. And the story you just told was one of those examples. And these connections just keep building, and that's what I wanted to do with Itch Your Break, is build on connections, promote people that I believe in, and in your new company, Hired Hand Studios, is just one of those ideal things that I want to promote, because I've worked with you hand in hand on a couple projects, and I've seen your graphic design firsthand, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to come out here and tell everybody, hey, how did this thing get started, and what do you do, and how do you go about doing what you do? You care if we talk about that?
Oh, I'd actually appreciate it if we could. And thanks for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it, and appreciate this opportunity.
So, how did you start with the idea of creating this production company? I guess is what you would do. Is it what you considered a production company, or maybe a graphic design company? How do you classify this company?
Well, I should probably classify it, but on the business card it says graphic design, sketch artist, and caricature artist. But it's more or less just kind of like a platform, a way to market myself. I've actually believe I came up with the concept of Hired Hand Studios, although I've never actually owned a studio. It's all just been on the kitchen table or my desk that I finally got, and but all from home. But it's just what I called myself when I'd go out to like the Newcastle Spring Fling here in Henry County and draw caricatures. And I've actually done some video production in the past, some videography, and I also called that Hired Hand Studios. And so it's kind of just a catch-all to, I guess you would call it a company or a business, but it's really always just been me, one guy. And but it's just kind of what I call myself, and I've been doing that for almost 20 years. I think it was around 2004, 2005. I became a father in 2005. I think it was a little before that was the first time I started doing caricatures at events. and that's when I started using the name Hired Hand Studios. But to be honest, I've been doing this. You hear the term side hustle, so this has kind of been my, I guess you'd call it my side hustle, as they say, for the last 2 decades. And so I honestly, over the majority of those 2 decades, I've been operating from word of mouth. Somebody would recommend me for something, or somebody like even you, it's like you had a friend or an acquaintance that needed a logo, and you knew what I did, so you recommended me to them, and I appreciate that. Or I would do a video for someone. Like I've done weddings in the past. I don't really do that anymore because it's really expensive, as you probably know, to keep up.
Oh yeah.
To stay current with things like computers and video cameras and audio equipment, things like that. But so basically, I just, for the better part of those 2 decades, I've been working from word of mouth, and so I would get kind of a steady trickling in of business. But I like to tell people there's a reason there's a term starving artist. It's hard to, make artwork and graphic design your sole business and still have things like health insurance and car payments, things like that. And I'm getting really off track, but maybe I should have gotten those questions from you at a time.
No, I mean, it's perfectly fine because, I mean, this is all a part of the entrepreneur experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And people just don't think about what's all involved when, you got a side hustle. Well, you got a main 9 to 5, and you don't think about, if you try to go out on your own, what it would take to really make that your primary. I mean, people just don't consider that. And it's good that you brought that up because, I mean, people don't realize, hey, what am I going to do? And then you have to worry about if you're hiring people in, whether you can hire them as a contractor legally. And I say legally because some people hire people as a contractor and they don't qualify under IRS guidelines as a contractor. So, those are the things that you have to consider. So,
yeah, very true.
Yeah. It is just some, one of those things that you always have to go over. So yeah, you were right on to keep talking about that. I mean, that's not a problem. Now, talking about the graphic design work itself, how did that come about? I mean, did you take classes for art? Did you just, start drawing on your own and learn it, just by yourself? How did you learn this skill, and what tools do you use?
Well, if I go all the way back to when I was probably 3 or 4, as soon as I could hold, an old ballpoint pen at my grandmother's, it was one of my favorite things I would do with my brothers. Is we would just sit there for hours and fill up. It was lined notebooks. We would just fill those up with doodles, and I can't say that I was good at artwork back then, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I guess I just stuck with it and seemed to discover, everyone loves compliments, and I seemed to get the most compliments when I would draw something and really put effort into it, and so I guess that was encouraging. So I learned that I kind of had a knack for artwork, and so I just kept at it, and there's that joke on the internet, the meme where they said, a teacher says, "This assignment will have artwork," and then everybody in the classroom turns around and smiles at the kid that, is good at artwork.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest, I kind of like to be that kid that everyone's like, "Oh, he can draw." And so it's just been a passion. And, they say practice makes perfect. So I've definitely practiced over the years. And one of my favorite teachers, Mike McCardwell, was the art teacher at Henry County High School for the whole time I was there, and for a good, probably the better part of 30 years, I think. And I took every class that he had available, and over my 4 years, including AP Art. And I never actually finished college, but I did start out at U of L in 2000 and took some art classes there. And then I took some time off, and then I tried to go back to school, and I attended some classes at IU Southeast there in Indiana, and some personal things keep getting in the way. Life happens. So there's some kids born in there, and some divorce, not some divorces, one single divorce, and so I never actually finished college. But then, that's the great thing about being an artist. Sure, it'd be wonderful to have that bachelor's of art next to my name, but if you keep at it, there's resources out there. You can learn things like Photoshop on your own. There's especially nowadays, if anyone's trying to get into it, there's like 1,000,001 tutorials and videos that professionals put out there, a lot of resources. So I just kind of taught myself Photoshop. I got started. I actually have a sister-in-law, Marie Billings Adams, that's a professional. She actually made it all the way through college, and she is an ace at graphic design. She kind of taught me the basics of Photoshop, and I went from there. And so basically is I'm definitely not succinct when it comes to explaining things, but the short answer is I've always loved artwork, and I thought that I had an ability to do it, and so I put like hours and hours and hours and weeks and years into honing my craft, as it was.
So you do caricatures, which is the hand drawing, but is like Photoshop your main tool that you use these days?
I would say so, yes. It's like I mentioned before that I've only done assignments here and there, commissions, but in the recent past, I have kind of made a push to expand Hired Hand Studios and my efforts to actually get jobs. And so I have started a Facebook page for Hired Hand Studios, and I've actually picked up some steam, as it were, as far as getting commissions, and I've done logos for local businesses, and so I'm trying to get myself out there. And another reason I appreciate you bringing me on the podcast. But Photoshop, when it comes to graphic design, is definitely one of, or probably the workhorse, as it was, as far as programs go, because it's just such a versatile program. You can do a lot with it, and really put some professional looking stuff out there, because it's just, if you can think it, Photoshop can help you get there. And I also touched upon the fact that maintaining equipment can get expensive, but just 2 weeks ago I upgraded from my 10-year-old MacBook to a brand new one, and got the latest editions of Adobe Creative Cloud, is what I think it's called. I was still using I don't know if anyone's familiar with Photoshop, but I was still using CS6.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so many new advances.
But I mean, it still got the job done. But yeah, it didn't have all the new bells and whistles. So I'm actually finding myself having to relearn a few things. But I'm actually trying to get the hang of Illustrator, because I don't want to bore your listeners, but Illustrator helps you do things that are vector based.
Yes.
Which means that if you do someone's logo in Illustrator, it's kind of future proof. If they want to shrink it down to put it on a business card, it works. If they want to blow it up to put it on the side of a bus, it still works. But if you were to do something in Photoshop, it's what they call rasterized. It's like a pixel based, and it's just kind of an image that stays there. I mean, you can blow it up, but if the bigger you make it, the more pixelated it's going to look. Kind of like an old NES game.
Now, some of the new AI technology they have that they're building into Photoshop to blow and magnify things, they're getting pretty cool. That it doesn't, you don't see that pixelization early on as you did previous versions, which is really, really fantastic.
Very true. But another reason I had to upgrade the computer is you need something that can, do all those fancy things and those computations.
So when you're drawing these, are you using? I have to ask this because some people actually do. Are you using a mouse, or are you using like a Wacom screen display that you draw on, or just a Wacom tablet?
Well, I started off with mouse way back when I first started learning Photoshop. That can lead to some wrist injuries if you do it repetitively. But so then I started using a Wacom tablet. It was just this thing that it's kind of like a rectangle, and you plug it into your computer and you can draw on it, and it takes the place of your mouse, but you're not actually drawing on a screen like you might imagine someone like drawing.
Mm-hmm.
There are touch screen based laptops out there now, or people draw on iPads or even on their phone. It wasn't like that. It was,
oh yes,
it was, you were drawing to the side of your computer, and wherever you put the pen, your cursor would move on the screen, but it wasn't direct. But a few years ago, I actually upgraded to a Wacom into a Cintiq. No, and I'm saying that wrong. I should get this right. It's a Wacom Cintiq, and it plugs into the computer, but it's got its own screen built in, and so I'm drawing directly on the screen now, and it's a beautiful machine, and I love it to death.
Yes, and they're not cheap.
They are not.
They are not cheap, and I've looked at them because I do some artwork too on the side, but I don't do it like you do. I do it for my little projects. I don't go out and try to do it for other people because but I just don't have the time invested to do it. And, I've got a pad that I do that goes out to the side, but my next purchase that I've already decided on is going to be an iPad Pro with the pen tool, and then doing, either going through the Photoshop side of it or doing Procreate and doing some artwork and design there. So just because for me, when I do graphics for, the promos for the show, or maybe even some doodles that I want to transfer to digital, like, the logo for Adventures with Bubba, the whole character, I did all that sketch by hand, and then I did it on the computer, again using a tablet, but not one that you had a screen built into it. So
yeah, it's definitely a game changer.
So when you're thinking of projects and somebody asks you, say, hey, I want a logo made, what are what are things you have to ask a client before you even consider them as a client for a logo, to design a logo?
Well, it helps to know if it's usually a business. Sometimes it's an organization or like a nonprofit, but it helps to know what their business is. You kind of have to know what their identity is, because that's what a logo is. It's representing your business or your organization, and it's pretty much anyone's introduction to who you are and what you do. And I'm not saying that very well, but and so you want to be able to make a logo for a client that expresses who they are and what they do. And so first off, you kind of got to ask the client more or less, what does your business do? It's almost like I guess you'd kind of want their mission statement, and then you go from there.
So the thing about logos sometimes, especially like if you have a mascot or anything associated with it, it doesn't even necessarily have to have anything associated with the company, which I find fascinating. In some marketing schemes, it's really worked really well. I mean, like the Geico gecko. I mean, it's almost spelled sort of kind of in a wide spectrum kind of way. I guess people may have mispronounced it as gecko, and they started using it in their advertising. I don't know.
Yeah, they picked it as a mascot because everybody was mispronouncing the name, right?
Yes.
I think that's the story. Yeah, it's like what the Geico stands for, Government Employee Insurance Company, and then so the people were mispronouncing it as Gecko, or
But it works for them. It really does. And people just don't think about putting a character, especially if you're targeting certain audiences like children or things like that. That's a kind of a critical point. But even for adults, it works sometimes. I mean, you just you know exactly what that brand is and what it stands for. What is the, I guess, weirdest combination you've ever had to come up for somebody on maybe a logo design for a company that didn't look like it was going to work, but it ended up working?
That's a good question. I can't remember any that were really out there for a logo. I did recently have someone ask me to draw a caricature for someone. They had lost their daughter the last year, and so they asked if I could draw a caricature from a photograph, and I said yes, of course. And then they said, "Can you add angel wings?" And I'm like, "Yes, I can definitely do that." And then they said, "Well, she likes Spider-Man. Can you put Spider-Man in there?" And then I was a little hesitant, but I said, "Sure." And then they said, "And she liked giraffes. Can you put a giraffe in there?" And then I kind of steered them away from that because I didn't. I mean, this was for a deceased person, and I didn't want it to look. I mean, it's a caricature; it's going to look goofy, but I didn't want it to look just like an absurd mess and a bunch of disassociated things, even though it was important to the person. And so we compromised, and we put Spider-Man on her T-shirt, and so that comes to mind. Let's see. I did a poster for someone, and they wanted, I mean, the client gets what the client wants. So I'll try to guide them the best I can. But if they are insistent, I give them what they want. I had someone that wanted a poster for a bistro, and they wanted a font that looked like handwriting, a cursive handwriting, but they wanted the font spaced apart. So the thing about cursive is the letters are connected. So it was just this big cursive B and then a space and then this cursive I, and then so on and so forth. So it says bistro, but the letters are spaced out like they aren't cursive. And that was an odd decision. And they wanted a really dark maroon on top of a, pretty much solid black. They wanted a large coffee mug or like a cappuccino mug. They wanted a really dark red cappuccino mug on top of a black background. And then, so sometimes clients did just everything you did learn in school is for color theory and what colors go well together and invoke certain emotions. And they don't care. They just want what they want. And so that might've been the oddest, most, not really frustrating, but most challenging.
All right, so Matt, let's talk about ways that people can find out more about you. How do they get a hold of you, and all that greatness? I guess is what I wanted to say. I was going to use the old cliche, great jazz, but it's not really what it is.
Well, probably the simplest way is to just go on the old Facebook and search Hired Hand Studios. I have a Facebook page. I haven't shelled out the money for a full-blown website because Facebook has been doing the trick as far as connecting with customers and marketing myself on a smaller scale. And so that's probably the easiest way. You can get in touch with me through Facebook. You can find my email on there. I think my phone number is even connected. Or you can just send me a message through Facebook Messenger. And just to let your audience know, my email is matthhs@gmail.com. The HHS stands for Hired Hand Studios. So it's matthhs@gmail.com.
And man, I'll tell you what, we're going to be posting some of your artwork on our website in connection with this podcast. And I want people just, if you got a chance, go to itchyourbrake.com. Check out his work. I'm telling you, it is phenomenal. And we were initially going to try to do a video for this, but later I am going to be doing a featurette video of Matt, that you're going to see his work and how he goes through his processes. That is something else I'm going to be doing later with him. And hopefully he lets me come up and invade his space as he works. You know, some artists are weird about that.
You can look over my shoulder any day, buddy.
Well, man, you got any questions for me real quick or anything like that, or anything you want to know before I get out of here, or anything you didn't get to say?
I've said that this is my side hustle, but I just want everyone to know that I fully dedicate myself to the clients that I take on, and something I think my clients can benefit from that. Especially if you're on a budget. If you were to go to a bigger operation, you would find that you would be spending several $100s on a corporate logo. But so I'll take on any client that wants to come my way. But I kind of specialize in smaller businesses, and I'm kind of proud. I've seemed to be digging out my own little niche of agriculture-based businesses. I recently did one for Sweet Home Spun, which they raise their own sheep and they make some really high quality yarn and fabrics out of the wool. I did one for Grayling Angus Farms, and I'm actually working on one for a local farm called Wright Farms. And so if you happen to be a farmer or an agriculture-based business and you'd like a logo, I'd love for you to consider me Hired Hand Studios. And also I worked with the Henry County Public Library, mainly because my wife Suzanne is the Children and Youth Services librarian, but I've done a lot of graphic design for them, and I pride myself on that. I also did a new logo for the Friends of the Henry County Public Library, and I really enjoy working with nonprofits and worthwhile organizations. I also did a logo for the bookstore at the Berry Center, and I do offer a 10% discount to anyone that happens to be a nonprofit organization, just to throw that out there, because I really do appreciate working with most of these organizations, probably all the ones that I have in the past, but just really appreciate what a lot of these organizations and companies do. So I am more than happy to offer that discount.
Well, man, thank you so much. And like I said, we'll be doing some more stuff down the road. And thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
This episode of Itch Your Break was not a paid advertisement. Follow Jonathan Mertz on Twitter at Jonathan Mertz. That's JONATHANMERTZ. Follow Itch Your Break on Twitter at Itch Your Break. Subscribe to the Itch Your Break podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the iHeartRadio app. This episode of Itch Your Break was hosted, announced, engineered, edited, and produced by Jonathan Mertz. And it was recorded and produced at the Spark of Vision Studios. All sound effects and music were purchased through Sound Ideas, Pro Sound Effects, iStock, and Spark of Vision. Itch Your Break is owned and distributed by Spark of Vision. Copyright Itch Your Break. All rights reserved.